and professors and whatnot. The topic was storytelling. And because it is necessary to be a good storytelling to write a good appeal or a good memorandum. And so for all these years, I've been writing. But you know, when you're a lawyer and you're writing, you don't have much freedom. You have a client and certain facts and certain legal principles, and you have to at least address those as benefits your client. And I think, like a lot of lawyers, all throughout my career, I wanted to step outside those lines and write creatively. I think, you know, there's a creative side to each one of us, whether it's writing or it's music or it's art or crafts or cooking or whatever your creative side is. We all have that. And for me, it's I think it's writing. I love to write creatively. My background is I was a history major in college, and so I've always been interested in history. Always been interested in history, 20th century history, and so for me, it was easy to be a historical fiction writer and write about that period of time. But you might wonder, well, why didn't I do so then? Why did I wait so long since I've only started writing novels 15 years ago? And I think the answer is, well, I can easily say life gets in the way when you have children and you have a practice and you have all these things to do. Of course, it's quite an undertaking to sit down to write a novel. But I can also say that something has to grab you. Something has to grab you and shake you and say, you know what, you can get passionate about this topic. This is something you can dive into. Spend a couple of years, 2-3 years immersed in it and say something that you want to say. There's a point you have to make, an area you need to talk about. And for me, that happened when I actually had a case, a job that took me to Poland. And I'm gonna get to my slides now so that I can talk a little bit more about this. There we go. My case took me to several places in Poland. It took me to Warsaw. You can see that Warszawa there in the middle of your screen. It took me to Lublin. It took me to Samos. It took me to southern Poland, to Krakow. But I wasn't touring, and I didn't expect to be touring, and I didn't expect to do anything other than do my work. I went there to work on a case and to take testimony and to interview government officials, examine documents, that sort of thing. But Poland when you get there and even without expecting to, you have to be affected by the fact that you are in a country that 70 years ago ceased to be. I mean, it actually ceased to be. The Nazis, if you look at your map, well, you know what? We need to go to this map because this is the map of 1939. You see the difference? This country that you're looking at ceased to be, and it was replaced by that country. So when Germany took over Poland and invaded Poland in 1939, it took the whole left hand of this, the western part of Poland, and annexed it into Germany. And then the right part was they called the general government, and it was to be living space for German citizens. They were going to even burn down some towns and reforest them and that sort of thing. So when you're there and you're walking around the streets of Poland and you realize And it's impossible not to realize, because if you turn a corner, this is what you're going to see. This monument is outside the government building. And there are monuments everywhere which bring to mind the fact that their country was so devastated during the war. I can remember one evening when we were walking out of a restaurant in a nice part of Warsaw, and I'm walking down the street, and on the side of a brick wall, there are holes and a plaque that says, here in 1943, the Germans executed 22 people. So you just can't help but be deeply moved by what you see and where you are. And so it was at that time that I said, well, if I'm ever going to write a story, if I'm ever going to be creative, and if something ever going to affect me, I can do this. I'm going to write a story about an ordinary family that I can identify with, maybe a middle class, upper middle class family with good moral structure in a typical Polish town, not necessarily Warsaw, but just a typical town, and what life would have been like, what they would have experienced when the Nazis invaded and occupied their country. And then that book, of course, became Once We Were Brothers. In Once We Were Brothers, if you hadn't read it, is a story of just an ordinary family, just one you know, the mother, father, son, and a daughter, and they take in a child off the streets, another boy, and they raise the two boys like they're brothers. But when the Nazis come to town, the boy they took in, who was not Jewish, betrayed the family to the Nazis, and then they meet up and confront each other some 70 years later. And so that story became Once We Were Brothers. It took me maybe 3 years to write that story. And when I was finished, I had a 400-page manuscript and no idea what to do with it. Maybe I should have thought that through, huh? But I didn't have a literary agent. I didn't have a publisher. I didn't know what to do with it. And so I sought out literary agents, and I sent out sample chapters and letters, summaries, and that sort of thing. And I got dozens and dozens of rejections. So after several months of that, I decided, listen, I'm a lawyer. I'll form my own publishing company. I'll publish it myself. What could possibly go wrong? So I did that. I published Once We Were Brothers, self-published it. I published it myself. And for a while, it just lingered around and didn't do much. And then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, it just caught fire. And after it sold some 125, 150,000 copies, it got picked up by Macmillan that wanted to acquire the novel and publish a second edition. And so if you read the book and this is the cover that you saw, then you read the edition that was published by Macmillan. All right, so now I've published a book. I've written a book. Imagine that. And my publisher, my editor at the publishing company wants to know what's next. And at the time, I have a son who decides he's going to leave college and he's going to do something important with his life, his 20-year-old life. And what he does is he goes to Israel and he joins the IDF. He wants to be a soldier for Israel. So my wife and I, of course, like good parents, we go to visit him a few times a year. Every time there's a ceremony, every time he gets a beret or a pin or whatever, we go visit him. And it's just amazing. And you go there and he's just a kid, and everybody in that army they're all children in that army. I have to tell you, they're all, his commanding officer was 19 years old. They're all children, and they are stationed in the most dangerous places you can imagine. Now my son he was stationed around Hebron, if you can see that. That's about an hour south of Jerusalem, and very dangerous. It's a densely populated Palestinian town, and there are always crimes that are being committed there. But they're standing guard. They're extraordinary what they do in the IDF. In any event, that experience said to me, I want to write a novel, and I'm going to write it about drawing on the history of the animosity between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Why does it exist? What is its source? Why do we have this today? Where is it going? So that became Saving Sophie. If you didn't read Saving Sophie, it's a story of a young American Jewish boy, a lawyer, who is working for the State Department overseas, and he meets a young Palestinian pianist, pretty young pianist, and they start to date. But her father is a very strict Palestinian man who does not want his daughter associating with an American, let alone Jewish American. So he forbids the relationship. But being young and in love, they run off to America. They get married. They have a child named Sophie. And when the grandfather comes to visit Sophie, he kidnaps her and takes her back to his compound in Hebron. And this is a story, Saving Sophie is a story of the father's efforts to get her back. But it draws upon what is the history of this animosity between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Now, while I am out on my book tour, when you remember we used to have book tours that weren't on TV. When I was out on my book tour, it was a Once We Were Brothers book tour, and it's amazing that when you're out talking about Holocaust books, you meet Holocaust survivors and families of survivors. Well, now God bless, there aren't many survivors left, but you do meet families of survivors. And I was actually contacted by a survivor here in Chicago who said she read Once We Were Brothers, and she thought she was reading about her own family. She's an extraordinary woman. When I met her, she was, I think, 89 or 90 years old, tall, stately, beautiful woman. This is a picture of her in 1978. I don't know if you folks remember that in 1978, the Nazis, American Nazis, whatever they are, they wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois. And Skokie is a town that had a large Jewish population and a large population of survivors. It's a very Jewish town. At least it was. In 1978, it was strongly Jewish. And they wanted to march there, of course. And the mayor wouldn't allow them to have a permit. He said no. And they took him to court. The ACLU representative took him to court. And the appellate court said, no, you have to allow them to march. So there were protests led. And Faye was, of course, leading one of those protests. She was very strong. And this is a picture of her that hangs in the Holocaust Museum. Anyway, she contacted me, told me that she thought Once We Were Brothers was very accurate. She said, you got it just right. And I met Faye and we spent some time together. I remember one day we had lunch together and spent the whole afternoon over some coffee and iced tea. And she told me her story. Now, she grew up in the town of Shanoff. And Shanoff is a little town, about 25, 30,000 people in southwestern Poland. Again, it's about a third Jewish, like most towns were in Poland at that time, and about a third Jewish. And her father actually was a captain in the Austro-Hungarian army that fought side by side with the Germans in World War I. He was a captain, he was well respected, but that didn't matter because when the Nazis occupied her town, they went to round up all the Jews and arrest them. And Faye's father told her to hide up in the attic she did. She was just a young teen, and the father and the mother and her brother were arrested. She never saw him again, and she stayed up in the attic for quite a while. Made her way out to a farm, then got arrested. Went to a slave labor camp, another camp, and ultimately sent to Auschwitz, and escaped from the Auschwitz death march. Her story was incredible. And then she told me about these two little babies, how they got lost in the war and everything, and what happened. And I said, "Wow, I want to write that. I want to write that story." And she said she would help me write it. We'd write it together. But God bless, she her health failed her before she could help me write it. And so the book is dedicated to her. It's really a story of her life, but fictionalized, and it became Carolina's Twins. After that, I decided I was going to write a story about Ireland. I just had in mind I was going to write a murder mystery, and it always fascinated me why the Protestants and the Catholics fought each other for 30 years and what that was all about. And so this book, The Trust, is a murder mystery which takes place in Northern Ireland and draws upon the history of what they called the Troubles. Girl from Berlin was my next book. In The Girl from Berlin, I wanted to explore Jewish professionals, especially musicians, starting in that interwar period between World War I and World War II in Berlin, and what life was like for them, and what life was like for them when Berlin changed from what they call the Weimar Republic and that Weimar culture, that explosion of culture in Berlin, and became the Third Reich, not the Nazification and what happened to Jewish professionals. And so that book became Girl from Berlin. Now, if you read Girl from Berlin, it starts off in Tuscany, because I wanted to make another point. When one of my kids was decided he wanted to take a summer study abroad, when they said summer study abroad, we all know what that is, right? I don't think they're doing a lot of studying, but God bless them for it. And anyway, he wanted this summer study in Florence, Italy. I want a summer study in Florence, Italy. But he did, and at the end of the summer, I went over there and we took a ride around, and we got a car and did a father-son thing and rode around and certainly covered a lot of wineries, and they're gorgeous. I mean, it's really God's country. And most of the time they would take you down in the cellars and let you taste the wine, talk to you about their winery. And you would think to yourself, well, this winery's probably been in this family for 400 years. And I think in many respects you'd be right. But more often than not, we heard this winery is owned by a German corporation, which started me thinking and researching. And that's been an issue. That's been an issue since the war ended, still an issue. Because when the Germans came into Italy in 1943, they seized a lot of property, murdered thousands and thousands of people. And at the end of the war, they were supposed to return all the properties, but they didn't, for one reason or another. And so that's been an issue for, I don't know, 70 years, 75 years. Anyways, so that the book starts out where a woman, Aunt Gabby, is about to lose her farm. It's being foreclosed. She's being evicted. And the reason is because an Italian corporation says they have better title to her land than she does. So she hires Catherine and Liam to come to Italy and help her save her farm. But before they go, they're given a manuscript written by a woman 70 years ago, and they're told that in that manuscript will be the key to saving her farm. That manuscript is written by Ada Baumgarten, and here we get to the heart of the story. Ada is growing up in Berlin at that time between the end of the Weimar Republic and the beginning of Nazification. This is a picture. Ada can be any one of these sweet little girls. This is a picture of the Jewish girls' school in Berlin. on Oranienburger Strasse. It was, you can go there today and visit it. You can see there are a lot of pictures of what life was like for young Jewish girls at that time. In any event, Ada is growing up. Her father is in the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, arguably the finest orchestra in the world. He is first violinist, he's a concertmaster, and on Ada's 6th birthday, he gives her a violin and he mentors her and he teaches her, and she takes to it, and she's gifted and she's a prodigy. And all she wants to do when she grows up is to sit next to her father and play in the Berlin Philharmonic. So I want you to look at this picture, and I want you to count all the women you see in the picture that are in the orchestra. It's an easy count. There are none. And that's, you know, I get asked a lot, did anything in your research really astound you? Of course, when you're researching the World War II, it's easy to get astounded. But that's certainly something that astounded me, that there were no women in the orchestra, and not only Berlin, but anywhere in the world. There were no women in any major orchestra anywhere in the world. Not New York, not Chicago, not Boston, not London or Paris or any major orchestra. And women didn't even break into the orchestra for decades later. Anyway, she's growing up, and Berlin is changing. Of course, in 1933, Hitler becomes chancellor. In 1935, he passes his Nuremberg racial laws, and things are changing, and things are becoming very difficult for Jewish artists. And so Ada's parents decide to move her to Bologna, to Italy. And that's the second part of my book that I wanted to discuss, is what happened to Jewish artists in Italy during the war. It wasn't quite the same. Even though Italy, Mussolini and Hitler were partners, they weren't the same at all. In Italy, really had three phases of how Jews were treated. Before Mussolini and Hitler became very close, before Mussolini emulated Hitler, there was no discrimination at all. There was no anti-Semitism. The truth be told, there weren't a whole lot of Jews in Italy at that time, maybe 55,000. But Jews enjoyed rights with everybody else. But then when Mussolini became close to Hitler, he instituted his own racial laws, and Jewish children weren't allowed to go to public school, and there were taxes put on Jews. But still, the Italian people never bought into it. And even after the war started and more restrictions were placed on Jews, and Mussolini and Hitler were military allies, it's still the people of Italy never bought into it. And then, of course, Italy wasn't very good at war, and they surrendered in 1943. They capitulated to the Allies, and Hitler then decided to invade Italy and sent his troops down, and they went all the way south to Rome with the instructions to round up every Jew and send them north to the concentration camps. And at that point, of course, it was extremely dangerous to be a Jew. In any event, that was my story of girl from Berlin and what happened to her and her family, and how that impacted Staving Gabby's farm in 2018. And so that, but I wanted to show you this picture as well, because I spent some time in Berlin writing this. And this is the Berlin Philharmonic today. That's where the Berlin Philharmonic plays today. It's still a wonderful orchestra. But look what's out in the plaza right in front as it greets you as you come to the orchestra. It is a statue of a woman violinist. So isn't that ironic? Anyway, brings me to Eli's Promise. Eli's Promise is there were points that I was trying to make in Eli's Promise. One is what I wanted to write about Lublin. Lublin was such an important town, maybe the most important town to Jews in the entire world at that time. Remember, the whole Middle East was under British and French mandate at the time, and but of all the towns in the world, Lublin seemed to be the center of Jewish learning, and was very important. There were 46,000 Jews in Lublin, about a third of the population of Lublin. The yeshiva Chachmi Lublin, was the school of the wise men, the most important educational center for Jews in the world. It was such an extraordinary school that you had not only to be an exemplary student, you had to have memorized 400 pages of Talmud before you could even apply. And not only was it an important school, but it was a repository of the most important Jewish writings on the planet at that time. And so important that, and Lublin was so important to Jews that the Nazis made it a focus. There was a point to go there. One of the first things they did was to occupy this yeshiva, make it into their police station, the order police, they call them. Those were the police. The order police were the ones that gathered up all the Jews, found them. If they were hiding, they went and found them, and they gathered them up to deport them to work camps, labor camps, concentration camps. Anyway, they made this building into the station for the order police, took every writing out, every book out, and burned them in a bonfire in the street. Well, Eli is growing up, or Eli is a family man at this time. His family is there. He's a father. He's and someone you can relate to. He's got a business. He's got a wife, Esther. She's a good woman. They have a son, Isaac. And the story really is, my sense of it is, let me write good characters, meaningful, good characters, good moral quality. Let them be characters my reader can identify with, such that if I ask you, you can take a journey back to Lublin. You can be in Lublin, go into the minds and the hearts of Esther or Eli and determine what choices would you have made? What would you have done? Because I think that crossroads keep coming up for Eli. Does he stay? Does he go? Does he continue with this business? What does he do? He makes the decision to rely on a very bad man. Would you have made that decision? Did it make sense at the time? We know what a bad person Maximilian was. And one of the continuing strains in this book is to say that in every era, there are bad men like Maximilian. There are profiteers. They are evil people. They seek to make a profit at the expense of downtrodden people. And Eli makes a decision that he's going to rely on him. He's going to pay him to make sure his family is safe. And for a while, it seems like his decision was a good one. But you can never trust a very bad, evil person. And Eli makes a decision then to go to Łódź and not to stay with his wife and child, and makes a decision to pick up a child and ends him up in a concentration camp and all. So I'm hoping that as you read this story, you can personalize it. You can see what life was like for these people, and you can say, well, when I made the same decisions, what would I have done? Here's a picture of the order police. I told you about them. They're on a Jew hunt. They called it a Jew hunt when they went and tried to find people to send to concentration camps. Actually, what Lublin did was a little different from other towns. They had two ghettos. One was the general ghetto where they rounded up as many Jews as they could, not only from Lublin, but from surrounding towns. And they put them into this one big area in Lublin, really the poorest area where there weren't really very many apartments or places to stay. That was Ghetto A. And then there was another ghetto, Ghetto B, and that was where they allowed people who had jobs which benefited the Nazis. They could stay in their homes as long as they worked to benefit the Nazis. But that didn't stay for long. Second part of the book, of course, takes place in displaced persons camp. And in this case, it's the Fehrenwald displaced persons camp. Here I wanted to tell the story of what happened to Jews after the war and tell the story of the displaced persons camps. Not a lot is written about that, but there were so many. At the end of the war, there were 100,000, I'm sorry, there were a million people at the end of the war that were displaced. They weren't where they should have been or where they could have been. And out of those 1 million people, 250,000 of them were Jews with no place to go. They called them the surviving remnant. Surviving remnant. They had no place to go. They wanted to go somewhere and end up they wanted to get out of Europe. They wanted to go someplace, maybe to Israel, maybe to Canada, maybe to America. But the visa restrictions were so tight, they couldn't. And so the Allies set up any number of camps where people could go and be housed while they got their lives together, while they reconstructed their lives. And if you look here at the bottom where Austria is, you'll see a number of camps. That the Feldafing camp, the Fehrenwald camp, the Landsberg camp, those were Jewish camps. And in those camps, people were learning, they were learning their occupation, they were learning skills. This is where ORT was so important. Those of you, I don't know, maybe some of you women are members of the ORT chapters and the occupational rehabilitation training. This is where ORT was so important. ORT was actually stationed in the Landsberg camp, but these were times when Jewish families were trying to reconstruct themselves. And how do you reconstruct your communities? You do so with children. You have children, you get married. I have met so many people now since Eli's Promise was published, whose parents were married in a displaced persons camp, or who were born in a displaced persons camp. You may know some yourself. And here they are, they've survived the war, where either they were hiding or they were imprisoned or they were in camps or whatever, and yet they're in another camp. Now they're not being tortured in this camp, of course, but they don't want to be in a camp. They want to get on with their lives. And the way to do that is to move somewhere, but they can't because the immigration restrictions are so tight. And of course, here now in this book, we have a profiteer who is selling America visas on the black market. He will sell you a visa for a very dear price. And so here's a profiteer again. And then the third part of the book takes place in a section of Chicago called Albany Park. And it's like a lot of sections of American cities where Jewish refugees ended up after the war. Albany Park in Chicago or Brooklyn or Philadelphia, there are all these sections of towns where they ended up. So in a way, you look at Eli and he's symbolic. He's symbolic of the Jewish people, Middle European, and their migration from war-torn Europe to America. And Albany Park, of course, was a very, a lot of Jews and Poles, Lithuanians. And here we have another profiteer. At this time, he is trying to make his money by siding with crooked politicians and paying off military contractors and politicians to get military contracts with the buildup of the Vietnam War. So they're all tied together. If you read Eli's Promise, of course, they're all tied together by Eli. They're tied together by Maximilian. They're tied together by a theme. And so that's that's really the essence of Eli's Promise. Before I throw it open to some questions, I'm going to tell you about this book, which is coming out in September. I love this story, and I love it not because I wrote it, although I like it for that reason too, but I like it because it's about Denmark, and the story of Denmark is just a wonderful, marvelous, heroic story of the whole country unifying to stand up to the Nazis and save the Jewish citizens. There were 7,600 Jews in Denmark when the Nazis invaded. When the order came out to send those Jews to concentration camps, the Danish people unified, hid the Jews. So when the Gestapo came around to arrest them, they weren't there. They were hiding. They were hiding in hospitals. They were hiding in attics. They were hiding in basements. They were hiding all by righteous Gentiles. And ultimately, they were taken by boats, fishing boats, across the Sound Sea to Sweden, where they found refuge. And out of 7,600 Jews, all but 400 were saved. And it's an extraordinary story. And Defending Britta Stein tells that story. So that's going to be out in September. And that brings me now to the end of my talk. And
wow, Ron, I could listen to you another hour. Fascinating, fascinating.
Don't tempt me now. Don't tempt me.
Wow, who would like to start with a question or comment?
I have a comment.
Okay, Sarah.
Yes. It's amazing how your story connects to me. I was born in a DP camp in Bensheim. My parents were married in Poland. Lublin is not far from where they were born. They were born in Borislav, where it's Ukraine now. It's near Lvov. Anyhow, they moved to Germany, and I was born in Bensheim. My father was very much involved in the UNRWA. And I even have pictures of him with a representative from the US to the camp. And as a child of survivors, I didn't hear much. Only when my parents were speaking to their friends, but we never asked questions. So it was very interesting for me to read about the life in the camps. So thank you. That's my comment.
You're very
Thank you,
welcome.
Sarah.
Very welcome.
I don't know if the picture will show anything. I have
You could try, hold it up.
pictures. I don't know if that can show anything. That's my father in the middle.
Yeah, we can.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
How old were you there in the camp?
Me, I was born in November 46, but in October 47, we were already in Israel in a kibbutz. Yeah.
Fantastic. Rivka.
Juan, thank you very much for wonderful writing,
Thank you.
connecting our history. How do you bring it to the teenagers and youngsters to read your books?
Well, it would be nice if they did. That'd be okay with me too. I actually, you'd be surprised. I know that I can only speak for this area. I know that there are a couple of high schools that have Once We Were Brothers on the reading list, and they do talk about it. In Illinois, you're required to teach the Holocaust. And so some teachers have used my book, and I'm happy for that.
In New Jersey as well, we have Holocaust studies. In 5th grade, we start reading novels of the Holocaust, and we have speakers come. So it is become part of the curriculum. It has to be.
And they have survivors. There are not too many left now, but the one who come to share their stories with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. I have a question. How do you find time to do this research and writing and practice law at the same time? It takes so much time.
You know, women ask me that question like you, and I say, how do women find time to do all that they do?
Yeah.
When they raise children and they take care of a house and they
Right.
and they're managing their house and everything else they do. That's far more difficult than what I do.
It's a passion, I guess. Any other questions? Mar, do you have a question?
Yes, I was trying to unmute. I had a bunch of questions, but the wonderful author has answered most of them. I wondered how your involvement and interest in the Holocaust. I guess I did just a little research on your other books, and I see that there's a team of investigators who is sort of rippling throughout your books. I wonder if you could speak about that a little bit. I look forward to going back. Yeah, this is the only book, the Eli is the only book that I have read, but I will of course go back to some of the others. But I wondered, I saw the Catherine and Liam
Well,
were,
Catherine and Liam are characters. No, they're fictional characters in some of
oh,
my,
I understand that, but they appear in a number of your books.
they do. They don't appear in Eli's Promise because,
I knew that.
well, because they're not old. They were born after Eli's Promise, but they are characters that appear in Once We Were Brothers and Saint Sophie and all the other books. In fact, they will be in Defending Britta Stein too. But in this book, they don't appear because it occurred before they were born. But they're just characters. Catherine is an attorney, and Liam is a private detective. And but I do have people that help me with research. Typically, when I write a story, like Eli's Promise, I will go to the locations, and I will hire a historian will take me around and show me places, and I will, and then some of my readers and editors will add other historical facts that I can draw on. So sometimes it's a team effort.
So for your new book coming in Denmark, did you go to Denmark?
No, because when I was about to go to Copenhagen, the
COVID came?
pandemic hit, and so I was not able to go to Copenhagen. I had to do all my research remotely, and I hope that it came out accurate because I never write a book when I don't go to a place. It's important for me to go. I mean, when I wrote The Trust, I spent time in Northern Ireland, and so I mean, but this one I couldn't do it because of COVID. So, but
I think you answered some of the questions I had also. Oh, you have a quote. I read somewhere in your biography, you have a quote on your desk from Joan Didion.
I do.
I'm a writer. Writing comes as naturally as breathing. I like that.
Yeah. Joan Didion is one of my favorite writers. I just love the way she uses language, the way she's very direct. Her dialogues are just clean and just well done, and she uses language so well. And she has this, says, "I am a writer. Imagining what someone would do or say comes to me as naturally as breathing." Well, it doesn't quite come to me that naturally. I got to work on it a little more than Joan does, but
I'm sure she has to work very hard as well.
yeah.
It's hard work. When you start a novel like Eli's Promise, do you have in your mind a vision that you're going to have it in 3 sections? Like, is that in your mind before you start? That
Well,
outline, or
Eli's
does that
Promise.
develop as you write?
In Eli's Promise, I knew I wanted to write about those 3 eras. I knew I wanted to be symbolic of Jewish migration. And so but you know, a lot of people ask me, do you write from an outline? Do you know exactly what's going to happen? And I think a lot of writers will tell you that you have to generally know what you want to say and where you want to go. You certainly have to know what the end is before you start to write your book. But how you get from point A to point B can change from time to time, and new characters can appear or something. You know, during the year or two that it takes you to write a book, a lot of ideas will appear to you, and you'll get into a situation and you say, well, wouldn't it be nice if there was this tension in this area at this time? Wouldn't it be nice if this kind of a character arose? And so I think I heard one author say, I can't remember, I think it was John le Carre. I think he said he knows where he's starting and he knows where he's finishing. And it's like driving from New York to California, and he might take Highway 80 and he might take side streets, he might take Highway 66, but he'll end up there. And so I think that that's true. Sometimes you go and you take a side road.
On that point, I wondered whether the back and forth, the movement between different eras was part of your original plan, or whether you wrote it more chronologically and then ended up deciding it should be handled in that way.
You know, Marilyn, that's a good question, because I think when I started it, I thought I would write it chronologically. But then I thought it would be better and I could create more mystery, more tension if you didn't know what happened to characters. And so then I decided I would go back and forth. And that created a problem, because it's hard to go back and forth without confusing the reader.
Right.
So I really had to work hard on that, and hopefully I didn't confuse you. But you know, not to be a spoiler for someone who didn't read the book, but it's determining what happens to Esther, and determining what will happen to the other characters as they go along. I think that you want more of a mystery there, and you don't want to just lay it out. Otherwise, I think it's more of a page turner if you don't know what happened to those characters, and you can hope, and you can, you know.
Do you have
Thank
a
you.
schedule? Do you have a schedule that you stick to? Do you choose
No.
to write in the evenings, or how does that work?
You know, my life as a lawyer is litigation attorneys will tell you some days there's hills and valleys. You'll be extraordinarily busy, and some days you won't be busy. And so my writing fits into where I can fit it in.
Are you planning to have a movie from one of your books?
Well, actually, there's Once We Were Brothers was initially sold to a production company. And they sat with it for a while and didn't really do anything with it. And now there's talk again about another company wanting to acquire, but as of yet, no. That's a funny business.
We certainly look forward to your next book. Any other questions or comments?
What kind of books do you like to read?
Well, was that you, Betty?
Yes, it was.
I like to read historical fiction. You know, I like to read Pam Jenoff and Kristen Hanna and people that write like that. But most of my reading tends to be research. So I remember someone asking me one time, what's on my nightstand? And at the time I was writing the trust, and I said, well, it's a 700-page book on the troubles in Belfast. So, you know, a lot of my time is taken up by reading history books.
Helene, do you have a question?
Yeah, no, I was just reading that you have 8 children.
That's
So
right.
I was wondering, are any of them writers?
They are not, although they're talented. They could. One of them for sure could, but no, they're different. They're just all different things. It is the most different 8 children you've ever seen. Everyone has their own talent, their own way, and they all do different things. There's a lawyer and a farmer, and can't imagine.
Wow, you have a lot of energy.
Yeah,
It's fantastic.
for sure.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to hear you and have you visit with us. Our next event coming up is April 20th. We're having Michelle Cameron. She's a neighbor of ours here in New Jersey and a former Temple member. Some of you may remember her from Temple. Her latest novel is Beyond the Ghetto Gates. It's won Independent Publisher Book Award and a finalist in the 2024 Indies. I look forward to seeing you all there. We'll be selling her books for $10 a piece from the Temple. A flyer will be going out on that. And on a final note, we're looking for a leader to carry the baton next year for Meet the Author. If you are interested in this wonderful thing we do once a month, next year will not be once a month, please reach out to me. And thank you so much. Have a good night.
Can we invite Ron to come back in September, October?
For his new book, absolutely.
Good luck. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. This was
Okay.
great.
Thank you. Edith.
Good night.
Good night.
Wonderful.
Stay
Thank-
safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
Wonderful.